guys, so as you all know, I originally was going to release a video at the usual time that I release videos today, but then I kind of realized, you know what, everybody's going to be out with their family, or at least most people are. They're going to be busy, everybody's going to be exhausted, stuffed with food, etc. So I figured there probably wouldn't be that many people for the Heracles versus Hercules video, and I really wanted to give that video a shot at getting some love. So I decided to do either a solo stream, or if any of my creator friends wanted to pop on, I put a link in a section of my Discord that is only accessible to other creators for anybody that wanted to pop on and say hello. So people may be coming in and out. Celery was the first person to volunteer, so welcome to the hellhole that is my anger on Thanksgiving. But this rant is going to kind of start off as a little bit of a history lesson. I've got some articles that I'm going to be referencing. One of them is, they're mostly tertiary source type things, but these are things that I've known for a while, so I kind of know that they're accurate already. Dang. And Ikeda, by the way, Ikeda Hakubi is being incredibly generous already. $5 super chat right off the bat. Ha first. And then another one, Celery, one of my other favorite people. You both have been very kind to me. Thank you so much, Ikeda. So it's going to start off as an angry rant and then kind of transition into a Q&A stream. And anybody who's chilling out with me, well, I mean, you can direct questions to anyone. So welcome, Celery. Do you want to give a quick introduction since this is your second time on my channel?
Hi, everyone. I'm a YouTuber primarily focusing on Kemetic content. I do dictionary videos and informative videos just about modern Kemeticism and how you do it, basically. I do a lot of introductory content. I actually released a video today about different snake deities.
You've been talking about doing that one for a really long time, especially because, everybody thinks that all snakes or at least a lot of people who are not familiar with Kemeticism, automatically think of the Nope Rope, and, there's so many other snake deities within Kemetic, beliefs.
Exactly. I covered that very briefly in the video. It's a very odd misconception because we have so many very good noodles.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, though, in antiquity, and I'm not going to get too far off topic, unlike what happened on the bridge yesterday, I'm going to be good this time. We're going to get off topic when we're supposed to, not before. By the way, for those of you who are on my Discord, I did post the absolute hell that I went through to make a gigantic meal, because even though I personally don't see this as Thanksgiving, I consider it kind of a harvest holiday, and I do my own little Greek thing with Demeter and stuff for it. I still really enjoy a lot of the traditional foods and the vegetarian versions of them that I make, and I do a lot of stuff from scratch, because being gluten-free, you can't exactly say buy fried onions. You know what I mean? You can't go buy, if you do buy bread, there goes your wallet. It's $10 for a decent loaf kind of thing.
Yeah, that's perfectly understandable. We don't have a whole lot of dietary restrictions in my family, and we're Canadians, so our Thanksgiving was over in October.
Yeah, I remember you were talking about that, actually. Comrade did, too, because, Comrade's partner, I think, is over there.
Yeah, up in Alberta. Yeah, we're on different sides of the country, but we do have similar experiences in regards to that.
So, getting started, I'm going to be referencing heavily this particular article from the Smithsonian, which, as far as tertiary sources go, I think is a fairly reliable one. And they're referencing an author who wrote a book called This Land is Their Land, The Wampanoag Indians, Plymouth Colony, and the Troubled History of Thanksgiving, which I want to buy, super bad.
Yeah, I think that'd be really interesting to read.
And what's interesting, I don't actually know if this book was written by that. Is it that? Because it says it's written by David Silverman, but I don't know if it's that David Silverman, because it says he's a historian. So I'm I don't think it's that David Silverman, is it?
I really hope not. I'm not sure if that David Silverman has a history degree.
I don't know either. Nope, it's not that David Silverman. Looking at the image, it's not the same person. This guy is a Native American historian. So even though it's written by a David Silverman, it's not, David doesn't know that no means no Silverman. So
Thankfully.
That's a clarification. This guy has written actually a lot of Native American history, and yeah, there's Faith and Boundaries, Anglicizing America, Red Brethren. Yeah, there's actually a ton of stuff in his record, it looks like. But this is specifically a book that he wrote on Thanksgiving itself. He's a history professor at George Washington University, so that's over on the East Coast. That should have been my second clue, because David is unfortunately over here in like Washington, or at least he was when he did one of his interviews, because he talks about it.
Yeah, I'm over on the East Coast as well.
Ikeda, are you trying to get me to let you spoil me? Ikeda's like, put it on your wish list, and I'm like, you're gonna buy it for me, aren't you?
I need to start a wish list.
You know, I have been surprised, honestly, about how incredibly generous this community has been with mine. Like, I have had some books that I never had any hopes of getting my hands on get purchased through that wish list, and you guys have been incredible. Ikeda, you especially have decided to buy a lot of books for me, and I am incredibly grateful, and you've gotten shout-outs at the beginnings of, like, half of my videos, including the one that's about to come out. There is a bit of caution required when it comes to the Smithsonian, but this gentleman is a professor at George Washington University, so I trust this particular interview. Does that make sense? Paul was asking about that.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Always vet your resources.
This is a YouTube person, illusionist. It's Celery's Garden. I did not put links to anybody in the description because I have no clue who's going to show up. I kind of, like, I have a little creator area where I post links on occasion, and I was just like, I added everybody that was there and was like, hey, if you want to show up, here's a link. So I have no clue who's going to show up tonight. There was somebody that was originally going to, and they weren't feeling so well, so they didn't decide to come. So I will put Celery's link in the description before the end of the night, but I didn't want to, like, pre-put any links in there because I didn't know who was going to come.
Yeah.
So the article that I referenced, I linked there. He talks about, at the very beginning, one of the most poignant inaccuracies in this story is that, you know, this wasn't like first contact with the Wampanoag. Because I might be mispronouncing that, mostly because it's not my language, so I don't know how it's pronounced. If there's somebody who wants to look it up for me and let me know if I'm mispronouncing it, I don't want y'all to have to hear the tapping on my keyboard, so I'm not going to do it for now. But it's, you know, Wampanoag, Wampanoag or Wampanoag.
Yeah.
They had over a century of contact with the Europeans. And that included slave raids, which this is something I harp on a lot. A lot of people forget that African Americans were not the only people enslaved by Europeans when they came over here. In fact, we were quite a lot. And that's part of the reason why actually blood quantum laws were put in place, because in the South, they had a very similar like system to blood quantum, where they tracked like the amount of black blood that somebody had, and even a drop of black blood could disqualify you from getting on the native rolls. So there were a lot of mixed people who got excluded because they had black blood. In fact, in some places, there's still like native racism against black people for that reason.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. Yeah, we don't really have a very large Black population here, so I don't really have those experiences. It's really interesting to hear about that, because it's not something that's within my personal view. So it's always good to get those experiences and learn about actual racism going on.
Hey, Asilia, welcome. Glad that you're here with us.
Yeah.
Why do you have to be careful with the Smithsonian? Because sometimes in their magazines and things, they don't research things the best. But again, this particular article is an interview with a historian who, like, literally his whole body of work is on Native history. So I'm pretty sure that what's written here is going to be accurate.
Yeah. It's always good to look into his past things and see what he's done so far and if that's been adequate.
So let me get a show of hands in the chat, actually. Let's do a GH. Let's pull a Surus here for a minute. Let me get an H in the chat. If you were taught in school that the whole thing that happened with Thanksgiving was that the natives taught the pilgrims how to grow food, and that they ended up having a feast together to celebrate, either after the first year or just to celebrate the fact that the pilgrims had come and that they were allied, and that it was this joyful sort of celebration. Like, give me an H in the chat if you heard some variation on that growing up. All right, so again, to pull a service, the chat is very, very H. So how many of you have been kind of exposed to other alternative explanations? Because growing up, I also was exposed, in addition to this myth, later during a history class that I took in high school, they exposed me to a different version, which is that there was a slaughter of a particular colony, and the first Thanksgiving feast was actually held as a celebration of that. How many of you have heard that version? Give me an F and an H in the chat so that I know I can differentiate it from the H's of the original story. Give me an F and a G if you hadn't heard that version.
Yeah,
okay, so most of you guys, so it seems like some of you guys have heard the other alternate, and some of you guys have like everybody's heard the myth.
Yeah.
Go on, Celery.
What's interesting is over where I live, the story we kind of go with, or at least that my family goes with, is that the Thanksgiving feast was sort of saying thank you to the natives for teaching us how to survive the harsh winters, actually. Because where I live, winters are extremely harsh. Like, we get over 5 feet of snow sometimes. So that's what I was taught growing up, was that it was saying thank you to them for teaching us how to hunt and trap and build shelters and things like that, and sort of just bushwork here, bushcraft. And the feast itself was like sort of putting them up, not meant to be like, we're equals. It's more like, wow, you guys are so much better than us at this. But yeah, obviously that story is not necessarily true, though. It is in some ways, but it's not the whole story for sure. I think that's a pretty common Canadian one.
Yeah, so that's very similar to the version that we were taught growing up, though sometimes it's the natives invited the pilgrims, sometimes it's the pilgrims invited the natives to celebrate the harvest. One version that I heard that was later in life was that the natives were actually having a traditional feast anyway, because it was a part of the religious practice for that particular tribe, and they ended up inviting the pilgrims because they felt bad for them, because they were scared that they were going to starve. And so that's another alternative that I've heard. According to this particular Professor Not the Dick David Silverman, we're just going to say Professor Silverman from now on, so that people don't assume that we're talking about, the asshole, though that is such a bizarre thing, isn't it? Like, for this particular community, like, I don't think it would be a problem with any other community if I were live streaming and I said David Silverman, but specifically here.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carmen, that's very similar to what Celery had just said, and that's kind of similar to the stories a lot of us grew up on. So, like, first off, again, history doesn't just magically begin for us when the Europeans arrive, right? Like, that's another big kind of sticking point that I've got, because a lot of historians, like, completely discount verbal histories and oratory, because it's not written down, even though there are some tribes with written languages. The Cherokee are the most notable of those. Like, our histories are no less, trustable than, like, the histories that you find in, like, Greece or Rome or Egypt. Like, they're just as fallible, but they're also, it's no less, there's not a difference there. But, we're savages and conquered people, so screw us, I guess. But the second was that, the arrival of the Mayflower, as he says in this article, I'm going to read this little section and I'm kind of going to explore it with you guys a little bit. The second is that the arrival of the Mayflower is some kind of first contact episode. It's not. Wampanoags had a history of contact with Europeans. It was bloody and involved slave raiding by the Europeans. At least 2 and maybe more Wampanoags, when the Europeans arrived, or when the Pilgrims arrived, spoke English, had already been to Europe and back, and knew the very organizers of the Pilgrims' venture. Most poignantly, using a shared dimmer as a symbol for colonialism really has it backwards. No question about it, Wampanoag leader Osamequim reached out to the English at Plymouth and wanted an alliance with them. But it's not because he was innately friendly. It's because his people had been decimated by an epidemic disease, and Osamequim sees the English as an opportunity to fend off his tribal rebels. This is not the stuff of Thanksgiving pageants. The Thanksgiving myth doesn't address the deterioration of this relationship, culminating in one of the most horrific colonial Indian wars on record, King Philip's War, and also doesn't address the Wampanoag survival and adaptation over the centuries, which is why they're still here despite the odds. So, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. The reason that I had asked if you guys had heard the second version of that particular myth is because, number one, I've seen it in a lot of like sensationalist articles over the years. And 2, I've actually had it taught in history classes, and it's kind of halfway true. The King Philip's War thing, there actually was a feast that was thrown around the same time, celebrating that they had wiped out men, women, and children, a village, including, and I know most people, like, if you're squeamish, I'm going to give a quick content warning here for what I'm about to say, because it's pretty horrific. They locked women and children into longhouse-like structures or homes and burned those homes while those people were still alive.
That's horrible.
Yeah, we didn't count as human. So they kind of threw a feast in celebration of having wiped us off the face of the planet after, again, and I'm saying us here because, let's face it, even though I'm Haida, you know, or rather I have Haida ancestry, because there's a whole debate in the community about whether or not those of us who have culture and language but are not registered with the tribe count as Native. Like, there's a big, complex, like, patchwork quilt of what Native identity counts as, right? So I often say, you know, I have Haida ancestry, or, you know, somebody with Native ancestry as identifying myself, because I don't know if I count as Haida. It depends on who you're talking to. Oh yeah, go ahead and Google King Philip's War if you've got a strong stomach and there's nothing that you can break nearby and no walls like that's within reaching distance to punch. Like if you've got the itis hard enough to stay in the fuck in your chair, go ahead and Google it. Otherwise, if you've got even an ounce of empathy, looking up King Philip's War is going to make you want to hurt things. It's pretty freaking brutal. So what's also interesting though is, as like the article points out, there wasn't really a feasting thing that would happen for harvest holidays. It was actually the opposite. Like the pilgrims that came over would fast instead.
That's strange. Wouldn't you want to have a feast because there's so much food?
Yeah, it says that, like, it didn't involve fasting. It didn't involve feasting. It involved fasting and prayer and supplication to God. In 1769, a group of Pilgrim descendants who lived at Plymouth felt that, like, their cultural authority was slipping away as New England became less relevant within the colonies and the early republic, and wanted to boost tourism. So they started to plant the seeds of this idea that the Pilgrims were the fathers of America. So the whole feast as a focal point actually started because of a propaganda campaign.
That's not surprising, but very disappointing.
What really made it the story is that a publication mentioning that dinner published by the Reverend Alexander Young included a footnote that said this was the first Thanksgiving, the great festival of New England. People picked up on this footnote. The idea became pretty widely accepted, and Abraham Lincoln declared it a holiday during the Civil War to foster unity. So it wasn't even a holiday prior to that. So a propaganda campaign and a footnote created Turkey Day. Oh, say hello to Luna, everybody.
Hello.
Due to the immense amount of pain that my body is currently in, I'm drinking some willow bark tea, and second, I'm having to stream from my bedroom. So if you guys hear a thump, it means she knocked over my mic, and I apologize. Ikeda. So the too long, it shifted right when I was about to click. So the too long didn't read on why I can't register as Haida is twofold. The first is that my great-grandfather, even though he was full-blood, he passed as white, and his brother and sister got lynched over a land dispute with a church right after they registered. So he took it with the paranoia that a lot of natives felt at the time as a sign that they were using these registries as hit lists, basically. So he pulled our family off the very next time the rolls came around, and I actually found the records going all the way to like the year when he pulled the rolls, which was the year after this happened. They actually lived on the Quinault Reservation up north in Washington. You can go look that up. But they decided, because we were lighter skinned, that we could pass as white and pulled us off of the registration shortly before the Haida got recognized as a tribe. And because we were pulled off the rolls, basically I don't have a living relative that is in the tribe now, because both his brother and sister got killed. So as far as they're concerned, because he pulled us off the rolls, we don't count as Haida anymore.
That doesn't make any sense, unfortunately.
Yeah, I sent documentation and everything from like Ancestry and other places, and basically that's what I was told by the tribal council or whoever the hell is in charge of enrollment at the time. This was a couple of years ago.
And that was clearly an example of like protecting your family. So I don't understand why they would not accept you on those grounds.
Screw if I know. I mean, there's one obvious explanation, and I'm not going to downtalk the heads of the tribe, but the most obvious explanation is that like funding is limited, and governments have a tendency to get pissy with tribes that are not restrictive when it comes to enrollment, because they get a limited amount of funding, and so the less people that are on the rolls, the better they can take care of the people who are on the rolls.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my impression of what happened there. But for those of you who are curious, that's kind of why I can never register, even though I grew up with like my grandma and my great grandma speaking the language. And, you know, I know bits and pieces of mythology from stories that I was told. And I was kind of like, I was taught a lot of things about how to world walk and such when I was very young. So. Oh, hey, old man Dan. Long time no see.
Hi.
So that's kind of how it is. Coming back to the article that we were going through, it gained purchase in the late 19th century when there was an enormous amount of anxiety and agitation over immigration. The white Protestant stock of the United States was widely unhappy about the influx of European Catholics and Jews. Oh, look, religious discrimination. And wanted to assert its cultural authority over these newcomers. How better to do that than to create this national founding myth around the Pilgrims and the Indians, inviting them to take over the land?
Yep, pretty much.
So there's kind of a big thing there, especially because, you know, I've, like, you know how, for those of you who are longtime viewers, right, on the Xenia Bridge stream, which is now the Xenia Coalition, but it was the Bridge at the time, so I get to call it the Bridge. During the homeschooling rant, Jen talked about how her kid was given a pamphlet that basically stated that, you know, the natives let the Pilgrims, the colonizers, like, let's not call them immigrants even, they were colonizers, just, you know, have the land. They moved themselves, right? Like that's kind of the story that's often told in schools. Can I get an H in the chat for, by the way, for anybody who heard some version of that about the Trail of Tealers, or, you know, just didn't even have it mentioned? Specify if you didn't have it mentioned, like specify that alongside your H.
Yeah, we never had it mentioned because in Canada we had the residential schools, which were just as bad, but we never got taught about that either.
Heracles, I actually just went over that. Thanksgiving was not really a regional festival in New England. It was created as one just a little bit prior to that declaration by Abraham Lincoln in order to attract tourists, but it was not traditional. It was actually traditional to fast during that time. H never learned about the trails in school. Okay, so it looks like some of you guys had it mentioned. It looks like it's a mix. Some of you guys had it mentioned, and some of you it was not at all. Oof. We've got a Canadian who got the natives just got out of our way. I thought y'all had better schooling than we did.
In high school, it was good. When I was younger, it was not.
Yeah.
I graduated in 2019, so we had a lot more of the awareness, especially in my grad year. So we actually did read some Native American literature. Like in my 12th grade high school class, I actually read Indian Horse, which is a book written by a native about the experiences that others went through in the residential schools.
Oh, Avion Piscean was actually taught about Jackson and the Trail of Tears.
That's great.
So was CJ. Freya only learned about the Trail of Tears' existence due to a Europa Universalis 4.
Ooh. Well, I mean, at least you did learn about it, though.
And Freya's also not US, if I recall correctly.
Yeah. I didn't learn about it until I was interacting with a lot of other people online and learning about politics. That would have been about a year or two ago.
Well, and there's something else that this article actually mentions, which I often rant about. For any of you who, again, hang out in my Discord, every so often I'll get on the angry, well, communism existed well before Marx, they just didn't call it that, and white guys didn't write about it, so they don't think it counts. And the reason that I often talk about that is they actually touch on this a little bit in this article, but not in that context. It's that many native tribes had a very different conceptualization of property than Europeans did. For a European, if you own land, that is your land, as, let's face it, we're talking about history. So, dude, head of household, you also own your wife and kids. But like that land is yours. And, if you somebody trespasses on it or they try to take it from you, you can use tossal force. Like that's the way that the law worked. We're not talking about feudal stuff. We're talking more about this time period, this idea of land ownership versus like with tribal land. It was from this border to this border, the tribe owns this land, and communally they kind of decided what to do with it. There were some tribes had chiefs that kind of made a lot of decisions. Some of them had councils, but the point is that the idea of land ownership was communal by its nature. Resources were often shared. In fact, a lot of tribes did something called potlatches, where potlatches were effectively people showing off how rich they were by giving away a crap ton of stuff. And like the more stuff you gave away, the better your status in the tribe would end up. And so there was this kind of communal idea of taking care of people. Like within my tribe, for example, like kids were basically raised communally. Like everybody knew this is this person's kid, but like women took care of the kids together kind of thing. Like the kid is raised by the tribe. And so this kind of idea when land trades happened between tribes, it was this is extending the boundary of our territory rather than you're taking this away from us completely. So when the English kind of did these treaties, as he mentions in the article, like they initially assumed that the English were buying into Wampanoag country, not that they were taking it away from them.
Yeah, that's why a lot of treaties were kind of disregarded because the natives were not entirely like aware of what they were signing on. So there's a lot of manipulation involved.
Well, in that, a lot of that was a difference, like, in cultural paradigm. It wasn't that, because a lot of people are like, oh, the natives were so stupid. It's like, no, literally, it's like when you say socialism to a Republican, right? Like, yes. This is the best way to give you an example. Socialism is a demon to the Republicans. Like, it means Russia, basically. But when you say socialism to somebody who's a little more on the liberal side or even, on the leftist side, it means something totally different. In fact, to a communist, socialism might not even be far enough left, right? Like when you're talking about socialism, there's a strict dictionary definition, but there's also the sort of cultural connotations. for it. And when you talk about property between these two tribes, property being communal is such a massive cultural paradigm that you're not going to you're not going to translate that out of a dictionary. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's that whole emic etic thing that I talked about in my history video, which if you guys missed that, please go watch it. It's only 300 people have seen it. It's making me sad.
I'll have to go rewatch that later.
But it's not even miscommunication either. That's the thing. It was intentional deception, because once the Europeans figured out they could do it, they kept doing it. They broke every treaty they ever wrote with any of us. And this is part of the reason why Native identity is so fucked up. Because, like, I say us because, like, we've been considered this giant cultural mass, but, like, Haida people were across the entire, like, country. We had no clue what was going on at the time. Right? Because all this shit was happening on the East Coast. Like, it's a completely different tribe, totally different culture. Like, our myths were radically different, and yet there are some cultural paradigms that were similar, because there were some that were kind of shared through a number of different tribes across the country.
Yeah. Like, I live in the Wabanaki territory. We have a couple tribes that are especially big in Canada, but we have some in Maine as well. A lot of that manipulation is happening there, too. Because actually, I live on unceded land. Like, my land still belongs to the tribe, but it's just Canada is what the government says, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of sad. So coming down, it asks, did all of the Wampanoags want to enter into an alliance with the English? The answer is no. The leader, Usamequin, they disagreed severely. Quite a lot of people did, and actually tried to fuck that up for him, because, like, they didn't trust the English, because, you know, they've been fucking raiding the coast for decades and, like, enslaving people. Why the hell would you want this?
Yeah.
So, like, there was internal strife within the tribe, which, again, is normal, right? Like, you know, even there's unhappy Republicans, you know, across the fucking street from me that are pissed that Washington went blue. We're not, like, a complete unified force, but people often, because of how otherized natives are, they think we're all the same. They think even within the tribe or a village, we're all the same. And everybody forgets that, like, you know, you might disagree politically with your neighbor completely.
Yeah, I find that that's a lot of just sort of marginalized groups in general. Like, and you have Native Americans, you see Native Americans, and you don't think about these specifics usually, unless you're actually actively an ally or part of the community itself. And you see the same thing with, like, LGBT or pagans, even atheists. Like, there's a lot of generalization. Like, you don't see the individual groups within this one broad category. It's just that, oh, they're those marginalized guys. We don't know them. They're just marginalized.
Well,
There's no nuance.
You and I are actually a sterling example. Like, there are things within your praxis that would be hubris in mine.
Yeah, and there's definitely things in your praxis that would be taboo in mine.
Mm-hmm. And, like, even though, like, the cultures that we both, you know, pull our religion from interacted in history and even syncretized at one point.
Yeah.
So, like, it's complicated, in other words.
Yeah, and we actually have a mutual friend who does both.
Yep. Though I would argue that technically what Comrade practices is the Hellenistic era religion rather than, you know, like a syncretized Kemetic and Hellenic. It's like that religion existed as its own entity at that time.
That's true. That's a really good way to look at it.
Like, I just see it as, like, a slightly different religion rather than being, like, you know, one or the other or some mishmash of the two.
Yeah.
Because if your syncretism existed in history, chances are that if you're practicing close to that, and as far as I know Comrade does, then you're basically practicing that particular version of the religion. It's just a different branch.
Yeah, I like what the chat said. Now that's good praxis.
Yeah, Celery and I have actually had some really interesting conversations. We're going to get into a digression a little bit for all of you who are interested, but when I was doing research for my magic video, Celery was the one who kind of revealed to me that, oh, by the way, all those things that you're talking about in the spells, that actually comes straight out of Kemeticism. And that was before I realized that it was actually Kemetic priests that had written those spells.
Yeah. Like the
But like the
secret
secret
names
names.
thing. Yeah. Secret names are a huge part of our mythology. Like, if you have somebody's secret name, you can essentially control their power. And that would be exactly why those spells have it.
Yeah, which is not at all found in Greek myth, like, anywhere, ever. So, which is why it's always been so strange to me.
Yeah. Yeah, like you're mentioning it makes the gods happy, but it could also be that it's manipulating the gods in a way, which I'm not really a fan of, but it's really interesting. Like, it may not be meant to be that.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different explanations for how magic works in, like, antiquity, or doesn't in the case of Plato, who is angry that it existed.
Meanwhile, it's a regular part of my praxis.
Yeah, for me, it's not a part of my praxis, but I don't judge people who do it. Like, I just don't feel the need. Like, the reciprocity between me and the gods seems to be sufficient for my needs.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like Hika in our religion, which is the name for magic that we use, it's really a lot of things. Like, it could be wearing an amulet or some sort of jewelry, which I'm actually doing right now. I'm wearing some prayer beads that my teacher made. Well, teacher as in somebody that I follow significantly and read all her books.
Okay, Chicky, you are completely right about this.
Yeah.
Gainer says Plato was everything. It was angry at everything that wasn't from his mind. Let's be fair. You are not wrong. I didn't say that, but you are not wrong. But coming back to kind of the topic at hand, he brings up like kind of that rant that I just did comes up in this interview. Funnily enough, like during King Philip's War, efforts to unify the tribes against the settlers weren't always successful. Why is that? Because there were no native peoples during that time. That unified identity is something that was created from colonization. It was more the politics between the tribes. People didn't see themselves as Native Americans. They saw themselves as Wampanoag or Cherokee or, Haudenosaunee.
Yeah.
Or Haida or Tlingit.
Or Wolastoqiyik, the land I live on.
So, like, they weren't Native American first. They were their tribe. There wasn't a concept of, hey, we're all the same people. They were different from each other. And that unification, that grouping together, it's kind of similar to the identification of African American in a way, though African American identity was born from the fact that the slaves basically had their tribal identity stripped entirely from them. So most people don't even know what tribes they came from. But like if you go to Africa, this idea of an African identity is very, very different than, the African American identity that was born out of a history of slavery and colonization here. There's kind of a unique stance for that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people actually also forget that, native peoples in Mexico, there's a ton of them too. They still count as Native Americans. Everybody forgets them. But there's over 50 tribes down in Mexico and, in that area, some of which actually, have parts of them that are on either side of the border because those borders were not drawn by Native peoples. So when people think about Native peoples and like, well, why were they dumb? Why didn't they just unify? It's because they didn't see themselves as this unified identity. That was created as a political category as a result of the sheer amount of effort to wipe us off the planet.
Yeah. It was a community building because they were all facing similar racism. And it's really unfortunate that it had to happen, but it kind of benefited them because of what was going on. But I'm reminded of that one time I saw, it was a Republican saying, did you come here illegally to a native, I think he was a tribal elder, and he was from America. He's just like from New Mexico or something. And people thought he was there illegally because he was similar ethnic group to somebody from Mexico. And they forget that that's the same ethnic category.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, like somebody mentioned there are Maya there. There are also Nahua, which the Nahua are basically the descendants of the Aztecs. Though the Aztec Empire, funnily enough, Callan can talk a lot more about this than I can because she's very interested in these things. But the Aztecs were actually a multi-ethnic empire. So, like, the Nahua were the dominant tribe within the multi-ethnic empire that was the Aztecs. And, like, the Aztecs actually, they had such effective trade routes that the plague that devastated us prior to the English arriving in the Mayflower, which again was not first contact, that was actually caused by the fact that we were so damn good at trade and exploration.
That's great, but also terrible.
Yeah, it's fascinating. People don't realize how, for lack of a better way to phrase it, advanced natives were. Like, you know, Polynesian wayfinding, there's nothing like it. Like anywhere else in antiquity. Mayan and Aztec astronomy was far more advanced than anything Europe came up with for hundreds of years. You know, mathematics, like during the European Dark Ages, there was a Muslim Renaissance.
Yeah.
So, like, when people create this sort of Eurocentric view of history, like, history in this country began the day the Mayflower showed up, like, there's, you know, several thousand years of history before that. There's over 10,000 years of history before that, and y'all just erase it because, you know, if it didn't come from one, like, pseudo-continent, then it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's really, really sad because there's so much wonderful history there. Like, it's thousands of years, and people just ignore it because it's not written down for the most part. Like, it is written down in certain places, and they just conveniently forget.
Yeah, and so there's one last point that I'm going to make kind of on the political stuff before we shift to the Q&A portion of the stream, which for the Q&A portion, I'm going to give you guys a reminder. Y'all were super generous yesterday, so I don't expect a ton of money to come in, but if you guys do super chats, your question does get bumped up to the top, in part because I am trying to raise a little bit of money for myself for trying to pay off this roof loan that's about to come due fairly soon. I've been a little bit kind of cagey about that, but if people are in my Discord, they know about it. It's going to be like some of my channel money is going to start going to that just because like it's an additional like $8,000 that we weren't able to pay off because of COVID effectively. Because we had pulled out money to try to cover the entire expense of the roof loan. And there was a certain amount of that money that ended up having to go because husband and I got in, you know, we got COVID before they passed a lot of that legislation that helped everybody. So we lost a whole month of his income because, like, the two of us were sick.
That's really sad. I hope you get enough.
It's not like an emergency. It's not like we can't cover it. It's just if you guys want to help out, I'm doing that. Normally, I'm not that, like, you know, capitalist-minded, but that's possible. But the last point that I kind of want to give about history is that people also frequently forget when you're studying history to read own voices as well. People who are native, people who are Nawa, people who are of whatever culture it is, you know, and on my channel, when I create my educational stuff, I refer constantly back to primary sources. If you guys don't know what a primary source is, again, you know, a lot of you did not watch my history video, how to research history, go look at it. I talk about that extensively, how to read a primary source, how to read a secondary source, what the difference is, why you should never rely on tertiary sources for historical research, etc. But primary sources are firsthand accounts or mythology of the time. And when you look at them and you study them in the original language or even a really good translation, there's so much more that you get out of that from their own words than you do from only reading secondary sources and interpretations. And there's so freaking little of that.
Yeah, definitely go check out that video. Like, I took a year of university and even I learned from the video. So everybody should go check that out. It's very good.
Oh, Faber, thank you. Opening up for the Q&A section, if you guys have any questions, especially on like Thanksgiving or Native stuff, but on pretty much anything for Celery and I promised that the first half of this would be me ranting about why I hate Thanksgiving. This kind of gives you guys an idea of why a lot of Native peoples really dislike the holiday. It's first off, it's built on a lie. Second, there's this idea that kind of colonizing is the same as immigration, and there's this comparison's often drawn, and the Thanksgiving myth is kind of emblematic of that. Like this whole let's all sit at the table together and, you know, look at how positive colonization actually was. Look at all the benefits the natives got. No, fuck you, first off, with a fucking rusty spork that's electrified. Like, you know, I don't know how you managed to get it electrified because of the rust, but still, like, that is a major freaking issue. I hate that. It drives me absolutely batshit crazy.
Yeah, me too. Like, I'm not Native whatsoever, but like, as a Native ally, I like to think of myself as a Native ally because I really try to think about it a lot. It really deeply bothers me.
Yeah, it deeply bothers me as well. To address Robert's comment here, personally, I think it's okay to celebrate Thanksgiving, but also acknowledge the real history. There's kind of a version of that at my house. We talk about the history almost every year, and I cook up a lot of the traditional foods because, like, hey, I'm not gonna turn down an opportunity to blow away a bunch of people who think that my diet must be horrible because, you know, I'm celiac and vegetarian. But there's also, because of that acknowledgement, there's a lot of trauma surrounding this holiday because there's so much of a lie around it, because it's got this idea built around it. I see it as a harvest holiday because a lot of harvest holidays around the world take place during this time, but I don't see it as Thanksgiving specifically. And in fact, most people who wish me happy Thanksgiving, who have known me for more than a year, actually will make up snarky names when they send it because they know how much of a problem it is.
Yeah, I definitely say Happy Turkey Day because I just don't like the original. And it's better. It's better as just a general harvest festival, anyway, I think.
So we've got a question for you, Celery.
Ooh, hello. I take it you derive your theology from the time of the Ptolemies. No, actually, I draw more so from the Ramesside period.
Does that answer your question? Mine, for the record, comes from particularly classical and archaic Athens. That's where the majority, like, I tend to lean heavily on Homer and Hesiod for a lot of my theological stuff. Ikeda Hakubi, thank you so much. You have been so freaking generous. Now you need to add the rusty electrified spork to the server lore. The description would be, how did you get it electrified? There was a question right above that from Ping that I somehow missed. How can people think colonizing is the same as immigration? Oh, gods. Celery, do you want to try to take this one? Because I don't want to start shouting.
Sure. Well,
the answer, I mean, it starts with bad education, and I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, my thing is, I'm pretty sure they think, oh, people go from one place to other place. It's immigration. It's not anything else. Because they don't really think about the nuance. Because there's definitely nuance when it comes to whether you're going to a new place to start a new life or you're going to a new place because everybody else is and you're trying to get a piece of the pie and there's new, unconquered, wild, scary, spooky, beautiful lands and there's like so much money and so much great stuff.
America was empty if you didn't count us.
Yeah, pretty much.
Manifest destiny. Oh yeah, natives aren't human. Like, just get rid of them and the land was empty. It was uncolonized.
Yeah. Like, oh, look, it's untouched, beautiful nature, even though there are a bunch of people here. But they're not people.
Somebody needs to find a way to make this happen. Like, we need to figure out what specific chemical reaction would have to cause electrified rust. The electrified rust paradox. Oh god, this is going to actually become server lore, I'm afraid. I got a question from Heracles. How can one celebrate Thanksgiving and be respectful of the natives? Well, first off, awareness is important. Again, I can't speak for all natives. I don't even know if I count as native because of all the shit that I talked about earlier. I have heritage. I don't technically count as belonging to a tribe. I'm just talking for myself here. if it's safe for you to talk to your family about the history, if it's safe to kind of discuss these things with friends, if it's safe for you, and I'm saying if it's safe because some people have really abusive family, right? Like some people have highly conservative, some people have highly nasty family where if you bring up something like this, you might end up in danger. And I do not want my audience to put themselves in that. Like, don't do this just because somebody on YouTube told you to if it's not going to be safe for you. But if people around you are unaware of these things, if you hear the kind of bullshit that we were talking about, if your kids are learning this stuff in school and you're a parent, push back. Talk about the real history. Do your best to face up to it, to learn about it from own voices. And if you really want to, I actually posted on Twitter yesterday, there are Native American author lists on places like, where was the one that I pulled from yesterday? Like Book Riot has one. There's one that I posted earlier too, where they post books by Native authors, and go support a Native author who wrote like a memoir or fiction or history. Like, do something like donate to a tribal campaign for a problem that they're suffering through. Acknowledge the reality if you can. Put your time and effort and energy into helping other people learn, and make sure that you vocally push back against the myths. Again, if it's safe. You can enjoy your turkey. You can be thankful. It's okay. Like, those are the positive aspects of the holiday. It's the colonial myth and the attitude that comes with that is the problem.
Yeah, for me, I feel like it's, for me, like my family is quite conservative, but they try to be socially liberal, but they just don't understand. And I try to be as progressive as possible, but it's just exhausting to even talk to them about politics because they preach. Like, I mention anything and they go off as if I'm wrong because I'm young.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that it's not productive to talk to them, even though I do try sometimes.
Why? Oh gods, there is this incredibly dedicated discussion in the chat that is currently going on about how to electrify a rusty spork. I love you guys so much. Oh god, Tualiakai, it depends on the solvent used to channel the electric current. Solvent specifically, we're talking about specifically a rusty spork. There's no liquid on it. It's already rusted. Yeah, that is true, Akeda. Unless the spork is so rusted that there's no solid metal left, it will conduct electricity. So I guess we'd have to figure out the rust quotient of the spork, like what percentage of it is. Most of the time, rust doesn't get very far, unless it's immersed in water or something. What can we use the spork for? I have no idea.
What can't you use it for?
Soup.
True.
Sporks are not particularly useful for soup.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't imagine an electrified spork would be very useful for eating in general. Unless, of course, you're a computer or a battery. In which case, it would be the food.
Battery-powered spork. Oh, gods, we are way the fuck off track. Sorry to get us off track. This is not what we were here for. Carry on, please. Thank you, Akeda.
Thank you.
Oh, my gods. So we're still at the Q&A portion. For the 56 of you that are still here, I seem to have bored 5 people away because of the sport conversation. Do you guys have any more questions for us? Zachary says, I would technically be called libertarian, right? And talking to my family about government overstepping its bounds is tiring. They always assume the worst of what I say.
Yeah, I'm not there politically, but I agree. Like, it can be very exhausting coming from any place that's different from your parents.
You're pretty close to a Dem sock, aren't you?
Me, yes. Yeah, I would be more radical, but at the current moment, I try to, it's difficult to be anything, especially around my family.
Carmen, so. I don't have a donation thing set up because it's not that dire yet. It's just a matter of I'm doing a few more incentives to help out so that I can donate a little bit more, like out of my business funds toward the household stuff. Things are just a lot tighter, and we've got that $8,000, and the faster we can pay that off, the better quality content and stuff I can make, because the more of that money is going to be available for it. So it's not necessarily like an emergency the way Cyrus's is, because like Cyrus's house is going to crumble down around him, and I'm just dealing with a big loan that's just like majorly putting a squeeze on our ability to do much of anything outside of pay it off. But if you want to, Ko-Fi, there's a link in the description to all of my videos to my Ko-Fi. They take the least amount out of all of the middle people, so that would be really, really helpful. Or, like, if you guys check out my wish list, getting me stuff off the wish list gets me, like, those books without me having to buy them. That can be just as helpful as donating money as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I was trying to talk earlier and I completely lost myself in my words. So what I was trying to say is that it's easier to get people on board with DemSoc. We just have to get past the scary word socialism.
Socialism.
Socialism. It's basically communist Russia.
You know, there have been some interesting fights in the community about the word socialism, because it's like there are people who are like denotative dictionary definition. You know, socialism is specifically when, you know, the people, like the workers, own the means of production. And then there's like everybody else, which, you know, connotative definition. Socialism is when collectively owned, like something is collectively owned to some degree, which often means stuff like government intervention and the like. And I tend to lean a little more towards that. One of these days, though, y'all are going to get me on a freaking rant about worker co-ops, because worker co-ops are a far, far more stable like form of business ownership and structure. And there's a number of them that are extremely successful, but most banks are corporations, so they are not incentivized to create more like co-owned structures. Excuse my stomach. Let's see. We've got a couple questions now.
I noticed one from Jericho Spades. Why snake deities? I think that's in reference to my video today.
Well, I mean, you could talk about, you know, the god that shall, or the thing, I guess, because he's not really a god, is he?
In my personal view, he's more of an entity that's like doesn't have a personhood in a way. Like it, not really a.
It's chaos personified.
Being. Yeah. Like we personify it as a snake because that's an easy way to comprehend it. But I see it as more of a force of nature, which is basically entropy. Because at the end of everything will return to new, which means everything will be destroyed. So I think it'll be that thing.
So we've got a couple of questions, actually. Ikeda, the name of the book that I was talking about is called This Land is Their Land. And I actually put it in the wish list when you asked me to. So it's in there. It should be right at the top. Next question. There was another one that was right below it. This one's for you, Celery. Does Canadian Thanksgiving have a different lore from American Thanksgiving? We kind of covered this earlier a little bit when you talked about, like, yours is a little more focused on, hey, that you guys, like, thanked the natives for helping you, whereas for us, it depends on where your school's located in the country, basically.
Yeah, for us, it's more so like they taught us how to survive because we kept dying. Like a lot of our colonies initially up in Canada, like they just died because the winter was so harsh and they weren't prepared. So Thanksgiving for us, the lore surrounding it, we think of it as the natives teaching us how to not die in the winter and us thanking them for that.
So Star Raptor asks, what would you consider to be the most interesting native versus native conflict? Actually, I find that the inter-native arguments are significantly less interesting than some of the often overlooked alliances. For example, the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, most people don't even know anything about it, but it's actually kind of brilliant, and the American government was partially, like, modeled after it. Several of you actually got that right in the comments when I gave y'all homework. I am so proud of you. So, like, it's already been spoiled. I can reveal the answer to that one. But that was actually really, really fascinating. Honestly, I've read the story of Hiawatha and the whole foundation of the Iroquois Confederacy, and getting a whole bunch of squabbling tribes together to kind of form a pseudo council and work together is an incredible feat.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that whole thing, that's so fascinating. I did watch some videos on it a little while ago, and I remember we actually have a street called Hiawatha Avenue in my town, it's very interesting. I love that we get those little things, like those little historical pieces of culture that we bring into like our community, you know?
Okay, so Star Raptor, first off, co-ops can not only compete, that they are actually like 70% more stable than the traditional corporate or small business models, like single ownership type models, or even stock ownership type models. However, banks severely disincentivize the foundation of co-ops. They are significantly less likely to give out loans for them, even though like studies bear out that they are more stable. There's a whole systemic like thrashing towards co-ops, despite the fact that co-ops are consistently much stronger businesses than corporations. The problem is not competition. The problem is that there are systemic disincentives to create them. Ikeda gave us another super chat. Thank you so much, Ikeda. You're being so generous tonight. I would love to see you, Celery, and Jen do a stream about what economic or political model you support and why. That would actually be really cool, and it would give us a damn good reason to bring you back on the coalition.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. We could have a little political sort of rant / communication. Like, not communication, conversation. I am lost in my words tonight.
Well, I mean, speaking of conversations, we don't have a date set, but do you want to give people a little bit of a sneak peek about the other appearance that you might be doing, like on a Saturday stream with me?
Yeah, we were talking about modern priesthood and how that looks, especially differing in our different traditions, and like especially talking
whether or not
about
that's even possible. First off,
yeah, and talking about like priestly hierarchies as well is something I want to touch on, because Egyptian priesthood, it was so rigidly hierarchical and bureaucratic. It's unbelievable. That is how they ran their country.
Yeah, like Freya is completely on point here, by the way, about co-ops. We're doing a whole stream on this at some point. Like Jen and I have actually agreed that we're going to do a stream on co-ops at some point. We just don't have it scheduled yet. But even if we ignore stability, people working in co-ops also consistently report higher levels of happiness. They also tend to share significantly more in the profits of their company, and so they tend to work harder, and they also have a tendency to be significantly more efficient because there's not near as much overhead because decisions are made collectively. Like in Spain, there is a massive co-op that actually has done better than nearly any other company following the recession.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated to learn more about those, because I've never really learned much on that topic.
That is some brilliant chat meaning, Ikeda. I bet a co-op could make stainless steel sporks that don't rust. But then it wouldn't be electrified rusted spork. It wouldn't be a part of the server war if a co-op made it.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a stainless steel spork, though. I've only ever seen plastic.
Yeah, I guess it's such a useless idea. Mondragon, yes, thank you, Cassandra. We've got Carbuckle. Happy Harvest Home, U.S. Americans. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But also, I'm Canadian, so I don't technically count.
Yeah, but I mean, happy Harvest holiday anyway, even though it's 2 weeks late.
Yeah. Yeah, we had ours, I think it's the 3rd Sunday in October. I don't remember.
The 3rd Sunday in October.
I think. It might be the 2nd.
We could code it with fake rust. Now you're thinking like a corporation, Ikeda. But do you guys have any more questions for the two of us? Because, wow, I can't believe there are 59 people chilling. Like, thank you guys so much for hanging out with us.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. I remember there was a question before, why snake deities? We didn't really answer that accurately.
Well, snakes are actually important in both of our traditions, so go ahead and talk about your video, and then I'll talk a little bit about like some of the gods that found snakes sacred within Hellenism, because there's actually quite a lot of them. Most people think of Apollon, but there are actually, like, even Athena had associations with snakes.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, I did the topic because I saw a misconception. We mentioned earlier in the stream, actually, that all Egyptians thought snakes are terrifying and chaotic, even though it's like we only have one bad noodle that does that. Some of the deities are seen as dangerous. One of them, Nehebkau, that I mentioned, is actually pretty sure he had some negative associations, connotations at some point. But I can't really find anything on that deeper. So yeah, he's very interesting. But we have so
Jericho
many.
Spade says Set.
No, Set is actually not associated with snakes. But
Doesn't
that is a
Set
very
isn't
good
Set
point.
like it's Set's kind of animal? Like he's his own animal.
Yeah, they call it the Shah or the Typhonic Beast because he was syncretized with Typhon in the Hellenistic era. He was chaotic, but he wasn't chaos personified. I see him as the chaos that serves order, and he's actually part of my personal pantheon.
So Zachary, I am going to remind you, this is not the native's perspective. This is a native's perspective. I'm speaking for myself when I give you commentary on this. So do not take anything that I say as authoritative for all native peoples. We're all different tribes, let alone different individuals. And somebody who's from the Wampanoag is probably going to be a lot more resentful than I am about the Plymouth colony. The problem with the Plymouth colony is that they fucked us over, basically. Like, they and all the other English settlements and the French and the Spanish, like, screwed over Native Americans. There was this idea that they could, and so they did. So most people, like, they're oath breakers, basically, is the, Hellenic way to say it. They made treaties that they then broke. They lied to people, they deceived us, and there were massive communication problems because their perception of what, like, appropriate was, of what colony ownership was, what land ownership was, is radically different than anything that we did. So as a native, fuck the Plymouth colony, and fuck the fact that everybody seems to think that the Plymouth colony is like the start of history, on this continent. Because I'm not even going to say in this country, because that is technically the start of history for this country, unless, you specifically count, like, the Declaration of Independence and such. But, like, on this continent, there's 12,000 fucking years of history, and y'all keep forgetting that.
Yeah.
That is a horrible pun, Ikeda, and I give you, like, kudos for that. So you want to read this one because it's yours, Celery.
So Sekhmet rises in the east and sets in the west. I actually love that because in the west, or going to the west, is actually sort of Kemetic jargon for death. Because, like, historically, when you say somebody went to the west, somebody went forth, that means they died. That is the speech that they used. They didn't really say death, because it's not really a sense of anything happening to you. It's just you go to a new place. It's just a part of life, just like breathing,
Yeah. So we had another question. Didn't Set also fight against the bad Snek in some stories?
Yeah, I answered this a little bit in the chat there. He is the Slayer, Seher Apep. That actually means Slayer of the Serpent in Egyptian.
You pronounce Egyptian so much better than I pronounce Homeric. I'm working on it.
Thank you. But yeah, that is an epithet that I use for him a lot. Because I personally see a more ancient Ombite set. Ombos is where his cult center was. It's also called Nubet in Egyptian. That sound means gold town, actually. So that is where his cult center is. It's also, I believe, Sobek is also there. So yeah, I see it as, like, my personal set that I do praxis with is that older version there, not the later period Ptolemaic Heliopolitan set that is very evil and wants to kill his brother, things like that. Like, I think those villainizations, as Robert Kirby says here, that's very much a product of the later period. Like, it did happen, especially in Edfu, where they worshipped Horu. But yeah, especially in Upper Egypt, down in the south, it is not as popular because Set was a very popular and revered deity who was the slayer of the serpent. And he was positive, even though he was chaotic.
So there's a question here. How long was it until the West Coast tribes made contact with Europeans after colonization began? So the plagues hit us before the Europeans themselves did. Again, because we were really good at trade, and because the Aztecs and the Maya, or mostly the Aztecs, they had these massive trade routes that would go all the way up the coasts. So like smallpox and fucking measles hit us like a freaking train right in the face, far before we actually met Europeans. So we knew about them, and we died to their diseases before we ever met them. But you'd actually be surprised how quickly they started contact with us. It was actually the 1770s or so, according to some historians' accounts. So it was pretty early on. We knew about them. It's just that, eventually, like, they started, fucking us over once they ran out of land on the east. They just kind of kept marching west. Let's see. What are our favorite holidays, Celery? I'll start this one. Panathenaya within my religion is one of my favorites, and so Panathenaya, for those of you who have not seen my Athenian New Year video, go watch it if you haven't. It's one of my underviewed videos also. It was like this massive, think of like the Olympian Festival of Games. It was like that, but there was also like poetry contests and like playwriting contests, and it was this gigantic celebration of the founding of Athens and the myths of Erechteus. And I went pretty deep into that, but it was the culmination of like a series of 4 holidays, because it was also the end of harvest time. So it's just really cool what it's symbolic of.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'll go ahead with mine. For me, I think my favorite Kemetic holiday would be the 7-day sort of festival. It starts with the final day of the year, which is Irimosit, and then the 5 days over the year, which are birthdays of 5 of the gods of the Aeneid. And then the very end is Uperompet, and that is the birthday of Ra. It's said to be the anniversary of the creation, so the first day of the year.
You made a video about that, didn't you?
Yes, I did, but I find it's very outdated, and I want to redo it. Oh, one moment.
Whoops. So we have another question in the chat. Do you think there are multiple gods with the same names, or do you think the same person wears a hat that matches what the worshiper expects? Okay, so we are now getting into personal opinion time, because I'm going to reiterate to everybody, we cannot know anything for certain about the gods apart from our own experience. Can you agree with me on that? Like, even VPG, like verified personal gnosis, is just like shared personal gnosis with dead people.
Yeah, honestly. Also, I'm sorry about that. I had a knock on my door.
Oh, no problem. Like, real life intruding is not an issue. But so I'm going to start with my opinion here. Personally, I don't think multiple gods exist with the same name. I think that what often happens is that either a culture will discover aspects of a deity through interacting with them, that is an addition to what is already known. Because again, remember, we only have our own experiences with the gods, and all mythology is somebody creating a story out of their experiences with the gods. The gods inspire these things, but that doesn't necessarily make it truth. It is a form of truth, but it is not like capital T, biblical, like things are literally, this is exactly what happened kind of truth. That's part of the reason why I don't have a problem with the fact that, for example, when I did the Who is Athena's Father video, when I was talking about what to do when myths contradict, 2 myths that can contradict can actually reveal different aspects of a deity or emphasize them. And so that's what my viewpoint is that I think that different cultures, because of their cultural paradigms, are able to access different aspects of deities. At least that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
What are your thoughts, Celery?
For me, personally, I think it's all distinct deities. Syncretization is very different for us. Like, it can be deities.
Well, this is specifically multiple gods with the same names.
Oh, I
so
see.
Like, this is like, for example, Aphrodite in Sparta had warlike aspects, but Aphrodite in Athens did not. Are those the same deity?
Personally, I would say yes, but in Kemetism, it's not really as big of a thing. There is something to be said, like, between
Your
Heliopause
deities
and...
kind of do like a Voltron thing when you syncretize, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's what they do. But honestly, like, there's a difference between, like, Heliopolitan or Ombite set, but I think they're the same deity. It's just that it's different interpretations on our end.
Yeah,
So,
that's basically, that sounds pretty similar to what I said. Like, it's basically like, especially because we only can understand things through our own cultural paradigms, right? Like, we just talked about that when we were talking about property. So what's to say that, you know, I talked about this in the Is Zeus a Predator video. Wow, I'm starting to realize how big my catalog has gotten. Like, I've only been around since like June. Holy crap. This is what happens when you produce a video every week. But like in my Is Zeus a Predator video, I talked about at length about like, let's say a person gets a vision from a god that, like, this god is a ruler or a leader, right? If you are in America, you get a vision from a god that they're a ruler, you're probably going to envision somebody like a president, right? And your mythology might reflect something like that. But like in ancient times, they might have seen Zeus as, say, a ruler of a household. And what does a ruler of a household do? What does the high aristocracy do? And that's what you see reflected in the myths. You see these truths, these core truths about the nature of the gods reflected through and refracted through the culture. Again, this is my personal opinion about how these things come to be, but it makes a lot more sense than this is the ironclad absolute historical truth of what happened.
yeah, definitely.
Do you kind of have anything to add to that, or?
I don't think so. I think you covered it pretty well.
I got a super chat from the Ramente. Is that how you pronounce that? This is for the Spork Fund. $7 Canadian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We got another question. Any lesser known gods of religions you'd like to bring attention to?
I actually have a video planned on this topic because I have a couple.
And don't worry, Greyheart. I see your question, but this is one that I figured would be a little shorter than gushing about patron deities.
Oh, I'm gonna gush here too, though.
So two that I honor are Hogea, which would be spelled with a Y, but again, I speak Hobaric, which that Y sound is actually more like a short U. But Hogea is the daughter of Asclepios. She's the goddess of health. And yeah, but thank you, Celery. And another that I tend to honor quite a lot is actually I honor the Titan muses as well, the Titanes Musae. And they are Nemesine. Crap, I'm gonna have to actually look up how to pronounce two of their names, just because they're actually harder to pronounce than you'd think. The Musae Titanides. They're Iode, Neme or Nemesine, and Melete. Later on, they kind of got identified with just being Nemesine, but the three of them, practice song and memory, are actually really fascinating, and I honor them outside of the 9 Musae.
That's really interesting.
You know what's shocking, though? I can't find statues of any of the Musae, Titanides or not.
Wow.
Like, you'd think, with being the inspirers of artists, that there'd be images of them, but people apparently just don't care in the modern day.
Wow, yeah. I found some modern art of them, but it's only like one author. Well, that one artist, I mean. But yeah, my turn for these. Yeah.
Nope, go ahead. Well, you said you had a video planned on it. I didn't know if you were going to answer, so go ahead.
Yeah, personally, deities that I want to really bring to the spotlight, especially Nemetawe, because she's actually from Hermopolis, which is the cult center of Thoth, also known as Hemnu, and this is 8 Town. That's where the name comes from, the Ogdoad, which is the 8 primordial deities I talked about in my snake video, actually. But yeah, that town. She's not really found very often. I've only ever found one picture of her so far, and it was on a temple in, I believe, Nubia. So yeah, she's not really present very much because the temples in Hermopolis are in ruins.
So, patron deities. I wouldn't necessarily say favorite gods, but I would say patron deities. Mine are Hermes, Athena, and the Musae.
Yeah, and mine are, I actually work with a couple syncretized forms. my matron is Neptut, but I honor her also as Neptut Sesht. So that'd be Nephthys and Seshat in plain English. Then I have Thoth, or Jehuti. Then I also have Hutor Nemetawe, which is the syncretization between Hathor and Nemetawe, who I mentioned before.
That's cool.
And I also have Set.
Yeah, there was somebody who mentioned, like, Set kind of got demonized later on.
Yeah, in the Middle Kingdom, I believe, was when it really started. But in the Old Kingdom, he was very much revered. As far as I know, at least.
Let's see. I'm trying to make sure that I don't skip any questions. Any thoughts on the myth of Isis and Ra?
Yes. Okay, that's a very interesting myth, actually. This particular myth, I see it as really showing how powerful and influential Isis is. Like, she's going out here and literally, like, challenging the head god, like her grandfather, well, great-grandfather, really, in basically kicking ass and taking names literally, and all in the name of her son.
So, do you believe that one deity can reveal themselves to different cultures and be named differently? This is soft polytheism. The answer is kind of. I think that sometimes deities end up syncretized across cultures, and they may receive a different name there, but still be the same deity. But I don't think, for example, that, you know, I'm trying to think of one of the people that gets frequently complained. I don't think that Aphrodite and Ishtar, for example, are the same. A lot of people do. I don't. I don't think that Zeus and Thor are the same. There's enough difference between the two of them, both culturally and even within praxis, that I don't think they're the same deity. So, in other words, I think it's possible through, like, syncretism, but I don't think that there's, like, say, one pantheon that revealed itself differently through humanity, and it's that cultural refraction that just makes us think they're all different.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see. Oh yeah, I addressed the whole mythology thing in my How to Read Mythology book or video as well.
Yeah.
What is my opinion? Okay, so this one's for me. What's my opinion on American tall tales like Paul Bunyan and Babe in the Blue Ox? My opinion is that every culture has its stories, and these are just the American ones. I think they only become harmful when, for example, like George Washington and the tree, the whole I can never tell a lie, when people start taking the mythology and thinking it's literal.
Mythic literalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a generalized problem, isn't it?
Sure is.
So let's see. Is a lot of demonizing just viewing through a Christian lens where it does not apply? Some of it's also just shifting opinions about deities. Go ahead. I'll let you take that one for Set, and then I'll talk a little bit about Hecate.
Actually, most of it was in the period. It was very much a thing. Like, especially in Edfu, they would talk about casting out Set and destroying him. Like, actually, there were even some curses placed on the followers of Set in certain places, especially in later periods. So it's very interesting to think about. But he was revered and demonized interchangeably, depending on where you were and what period. So not a lot of it is actually Christian lensing, but there could be some, like, bias there for older Egyptologists, of course.
By the way, I'm going to take a quick moment to shill. So, Ramente, I think you might be having a glitch. Try refreshing the page, because I see 38 at least, but there's still 64 people chilling with me, and there's 38 likes. If y'all could take a second to, like, feed the algorithm for me, pop on the like button, or just hit the dislike so you never see my face again, that would be super appreciated. Either way, the algorithm counts it as engagement, and it would be super freaking helpful for me, because a lot of my videos do, at least my live streams, do get demonetized, because YouTube gets pissy about talking about anything controversial, and this one might, because we were talking about genocide. Carbuncle, I absolutely hate Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell completely fucked up the study of folk tales and myth, and he was not even an expert. He just positioned himself as one. He was a layperson who was a little too fond of Jung and, like, crafted a bunch of bullshit out of his ass and then got a ton of media attention because he was accessible and charming.
Yeah, and not to interrupt, but I think a moment ago you were going to talk about Hecate.
Yes, I was going to talk about Hecate. So Hecate started off as actually she was viewed very much in a positive light. She was viewed as a goddess of childbirth and of openings and doorways. And as time went on, she got conflated with, because of a particular passage in one of the Homeric hymns, which, by the way, were not written by Homer. They could not have been, because they were very clearly pseudo-epigraphical. Most of them came out in the 6th century, which is well after he wrote the epics. But in one of the Homeric hymns, it talks about, specifically the hymn to Demeter, it talks about her being the only one who would help Demeter and tell her what she saw. And so she, saw Persephone go into the underworld, ran off with. And later, as time went on, because of her association loosely with the dead, there was kind of this idea that, like, Hecate, it was a subconscious one, mind you, but Hecate was kind of pushing on Artemis's territory there a little bit with childbirth. So she started to get associated with all the things that would go wrong and with the restless dead that died early. And then eventually that conflation started to be associated with like magic and witchcraft, and specifically the idea of the Thessalian witches who could like draw down the moon. This was also kind of helped along by like tragedians who the tragedy Medea, where there was this association between the Hecatean priesthood and magic. And magic, again, in most of ancient Greece for most of history, was not looked upon in a positive light. It was called Goetia, and it was not illegal. But if you got accused of it, you could get fucked over pretty bad in court because it was evidence against your character, basically. So Hecate shifted over time in opinion because a lot of people couldn't be comfortable with two goddesses that were so close in the same realm. And so there became to be more and more conflation with her in other realms and more sort of exploration outside of that. And eventually got to the point where on Deipnon, people would leave offerings at the crossroads to help keep Hecate away. But like Hesiod was quite fond of her.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Also, there's an interesting conversation going on in the chat. Before we take any more questions, I just wanted to address this. Portraying Cleopatra of the Ptolemies as black, that's super interesting because actually, as far as I'm aware, she had Greek and native Egyptian in her, I believe. But they were extremely into incest, and that was a very big thing. Their family tree is basically a quadrangle.
Oh.
Like if you look at it, it's not a tree. And that was something that was done a lot by the Egyptians, especially the royal family. The regular average guy did not do it, though. At least as far as we're aware. But yeah, that's...
Tell us how you really feel. I have raged about Campbell several times. I might make an angry video about him someday because, like, I get sick and fucking tired of people bringing him up on my channel because I'm just like, no, he's bad. A lot of, like, people who are actually experts in folktales and mythology do not like him generally. I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry. I was cracking up at the chat because they're all like, tell us how you really feel.
No, I was pretty much done anyway.
Let's see. Is it appropriate to ask how you both came to believe in your respective religions? I've actually told this story a couple times, so I'm gonna let you talk really quick, Celery.
All right, sure. My story is very short, very easy. Essentially, I was eclectic for 2 years, and I had worked with Aphrodite for a little while, and then eventually I had collected a small group of Kemetic deities, and when she left, I was like, what do I do now? And then I figured out recon was a thing, and I went and did that.
So for me, I actually was an angry agnostic when this happened. I had a vision of Athena that happened when I was getting out of the float tank on my way to the shower. And it struck me as to the point where I was unable to talk when it happened. I, of course, got every health evaluation that could ever happen. I came out of that vision, first off, filled with this... I've talked about it on the Discord before. I don't know how to what word I could use other than awe, but awe is so watered down. The feeling being in her presence was overpowering to the point where I can feel that my memory itself has been a pale imitation of it, if that makes sense. Like, I can feel that there was so much more, and yet I can't hold it in my memory because I could barely process it at the time. The other half was I knew that I was supposed to build a shrine to her and start making offerings. And I got fucking mad. I went to every specialist I possibly could that because I already had a neurologist, I already had a psychiatrist, I already had counselors and stuff. Talked to all of them about it, got a clean fucking bill of health. And was told I didn't have any other sort of predilections towards psychosis or anything else, so it was definitely not a hallucination. Well, maybe you imagined it in the float tank. No, I didn't. I was definitely freezing my ass off, standing, heading on my way to the shower. What made me mad, though, was how powerful the feeling was. I couldn't deny it. Right? Like, there was just no way to deny that kind of intensity. And I started doing research on how to make offerings because I had went through a Wiccan phase. I'd been pagan at one point, and I got disillusioned with it because I couldn't connect to the gods through magic that way. It always felt like there was something missing. And so I had basically I thought that there could be something, but it clearly wasn't interested in me. And I had sworn off religion, but I also didn't like the Greek gods at all. Y'all see how freaking dedicated I am now. I was not like that back then. Anybody who knew me in real life back then, both of my partners will rant at you about this. I was so pissed because I thought that the Greek gods were narcissistic, selfish assholes. They were the worst. The mythology was literal and they were fucking bastards. I did not like them at all. And so having one of them just show up in my life, a blast of brilliance to the face, to the point where I didn't want to fall to my knees, but I might as well have in her presence. There's nothing you can do but feel the urge to worship when you are in the presence of a god. And I don't think she physically manifested. I think she definitely did something to my brain, but it was definitely her. Yeah. And it wasn't spoken either. I just knew when I came out of it. And so after I started doing research, funnily enough, I ran into a Focus blog, Hearth of Hellenism by Colonialism, as my first kind of exposure to Hellenism.
Oh, no.
Yep. Yeah. Why do you think I got so fucking mad when I figured out that he was a Folkist? And I just, ever since then, I've built reciprocity between myself and the gods. And it has changed my life radically. Just the way that everything shifted from the moment that I actually followed through on the instructions that I was given through that knowledge, as opposed to through any words that were spoken. It's been incredible. There have been so many things that I literally, there in no way can explain. Even me being on fucking YouTube doesn't make any sense. I had no plans to become a YouTuber. I kind of got pushed into it through weird circumstance.
I can kind of relate.
Yeah, I stumbled drunkenly into this community by accident.
Yeah, me too. Actually, if it weren't for my one friend I met at Bible, it was a Bible study youth group when I was 13, I would not be here today. Because that specific friend was an ex-Jehovah's Witness and got me into Telltale, who then got me into Mr. Atheist, who then got me into Ocean.
Yeah, funnily enough, I actually didn't know anything about Ocean's content before I met him. I met him through the channel that shall not be named. Because, he came on as a guest, and that's how we met. And Cirrus had been telling us that we, needed to meet at some point. Because Cirrus and I had been friends for a while at that point, but we just never stumbled into each other until he showed up. It was weird.
Interesting coincidence.
If deities can change over time, is it possible that some ancient associations are irrelevant today? Well, yeah, I mean, for example, you're probably less likely to honor a deity of, say, supplication, because supplication isn't a practice anymore. So, the epithet of Zeus that protects supplicants, that's not a cultural practice anymore. It's significantly less valid than, say, Zeus Xenios, which is, the protector of strangers. What do you think, Hillary?
I don't think there's a whole lot that's different now. All the deities that have to do with kingship, I think they're just leaderly roles, like you mentioned earlier, the president. I I think they're still relevant in that sense. They didn't really change that much, but a lot of our deities have multiple associations. Like, for example, Hutor, everyone knows Hathor. They think, oh yeah, that's the one that's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? But she's also a funerary deity.
So we have a question. No, a float tank is not a bathtub. A float tank is actually they're also known as isolation pods. Basically, you have a gigantic pod filled with water that has over 500 pounds of Epsom salts dissolved in it so that you float in it. And it's at the temperature of human skin. So you're floating basically in total darkness, with or without music, depending on the place that you go and what you have them set up for up to an hour in like water that is the temperature of your skin so that it feels like your body basically disappears. So yeah, it's like a sensory deprivation experience that opens up a lot of creativity. It's great for meditation, and for me, it's a massive amount of stress relief. Like, it's like all of my anxiety for the entire like year disappears the moment I step into that tank. And it helps me like get started for the week. And also, if I'm working on a video, sometimes I come up with really creative editing tricks and stuff, and you guys get to see fun stuff in my videos after floats. I do them once a week on Sundays.
That's really interesting.
How would I compare my experience to Paul on the Damascus Road? Paul kind of hijacked a religion, whereas like I'm just kind of trying to help people learn about it in the modern days. So I'd say that like superficially they might look similar, but I think my intentions with my telling my story are quite different. Like I have no intention of converting anybody with my story, versus Paul was like, let's convert the entire world because the end is nigh.
Yeah, something Old Man Dan said, may not seem important that Athena was the patroness of weavers. I think that's still relevant, especially for like people who sew or
knit.
Or embroider.
Cross stitch. Yeah, like I actually honor Athena with my knitting and my cross stitch.
That's awesome. I actually started cross-stitching recently.
So supplication, when I'm talking about supplication here, I'm talking about the ancient Greek practice where somebody would kneel and wrap their arms around an altar and they would receive protection until they left it. Like, it's a very specific definition of supplication. Thoughts on games like D&D using pagan deities and myths? I'll let you take this one, but I'm going to expand the question to, like, media in general. Because I think that there's a lot more there than just games.
Definitely. I don't mind D&D using it. Like, it's really just for fun, taking from ancient religions so that you can world build and make something new. Like, I know I played a D&D campaign, and I was playing as a cleric, and like I was playing with a friend. He was trying to get me into it, and I was working for a specific deity who sounded a lot like Selene, but it was like Selune or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not Selene, but it was very much inspired by her. So yeah, I think it really doesn't matter at all because it's just for fun, and everybody knows it's just for fun. It's not meant to be a direct representation of these mythologies. Like, we know that Lord of the Rings is not Norse mythology. We know that it's made up and it's from the 1910s. However, when it comes to movies such as like Gods of Egypt, these are meant to be representations of mythology.
Gods of Egypt is like your Hercules.
Yeah, I need to do a video on it. But yeah, these things are meant to be representations of the mythology, and when they represent them inaccurately and sort of offensively, then it's not accurate, you know? It's very disrespectful.
By the way, for those of you who are waiting for my Heracles versus Hercules video, don't fucking worry. Y'all are going to get an angry rant in the middle of that one. Celery's previewed the script. I go off.
For sure. It was a lot of fun.
So deities do change over time. I do agree. Dionysos did get basically, he got a lot of his edge chopped off. Part of the problem with that, though, is that the Orphics had a lot to do with his initial sort of dangerous image, and Orphism Orphism is kind of like the ancient equivalent of New Age. No offense to those who are Orphics, in the chat, because I know that there are a subset of my audience that follow modern day Orphism. But from what I can tell from the scholars that I've read, Orphism wasn't necessarily a unified religion so much as it was like the kind of ancient. It was used as a label like for ancient New Age type stuff. They were kind of fringe beliefs and fringe myths. Let's see. Owning your own float tank would cost you your entire life savings. Getting a membership at a float tank place might be a little more affordable, which is what I do. I pay about $120 a month to do unlimited floats, which is significantly less than what it would cost if you joined the place now. But it depends on where you live. You can Google float spas. We had another really good question, which is from Transistor. In regards to gods changing over time, who are the gods of uniquely modern things? Like, who is the god of computers and the internet? I personally see Hermes as kind of a god of technology. Like, he was said to have invented a lot of what humans use. And so I kind of would see him as governing things like electricity and such, especially because of his associations with, like, swiftness and discovery.
Yeah, personally, I see Jehuti, or Thoth, you would know him as. I see him as a god of technology because he's a god of like creating things, especially people creating things like scribal work, language, things like that, communication, especially. I think that is definitely something that falls under his domain. So in a way, Hermes Trismegistus kind of exists.
I actually didn't answer my view on media stuff, I just realized, because yay, ADHD and meds kicking out. I have a slightly differing view from you. I agree with you largely, but I personally take the view that all art is divinely inspired, like all of it. That doesn't mean the artist doesn't put themselves into it. The gods give you your inspiration because there's something unique you can bring to that project, whatever it is and whatever skill level you're at. But I think that the gods, like, people have been writing stories about the gods forever. Ancient mythology, what we consider as authoritative, was once just somebody telling a story.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's people recounting their own experiences. So I think that modern day myth telling, through things like Percy Jackson, as much as I dislike the writing style on it, my problems with it are less with the mythology and more with the just bad writing and plotting in a lot of places. I think that those things actually can inspire and interest people to look into, ancient VPG, so to speak. They can bring people into being interested in history. And I think that that's a positive thing. I think that the gods still inspire stories about themselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate to who they are, because again, any inspiration is going to be refracted through your worldview.
Yeah, I disagree that all art is divinely inspired, obviously, but it's a really interesting view that you hold. Personally, I think communication and language can be divinely inspired. I don't think it's inherently, but I think at its root it mostly was, especially because like most people tended to derive it from their deities.
Yeah, the idea that all art is divinely inspired is kind of a Greek one. Like, the Mosai are responsible for all that is inspiration.
That's really interesting.
But the other half, though, that I do agree with you on completely is when people misrepresent mythology, I want to say maliciously, because there are some small changes to say that adaptation, of a story to the stage is going to change some things about it, right? Like, Hadestown is actually an example of a really good adaptation that carries a lot of the story of the original and kind of also brings the modern culture into it.
I love Hadestown. I still need to see the full thing, but I've heard some of the songs, and it's such a great concept.
So, like, things like that, I think, are very different than, like, Disney's Hercules or, God's forbid, fucking Gods of Egypt, which I was so excited when I saw they were making that, and then they just, like, dropped the fucking ball.
Yeah.
So I think that this kind of answers Dr. Dino's question, too. I don't have a problem with them using deities like that, as long as they're not being shitty about it. My issue is, quite often, pagan deities are literally turned into demons, especially in horror fiction, and I'm actually going to be launching a series fairly soon where I talk about Christian hegemony in movie making that's not supposed to be explicitly Christian, like in sci-fi, fantasy, horror, etc. The way that, like, pagan culture is consistently misrepresented, and I start to take issue when that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, especially in the sense of, these stupid pagans didn't even know what this was. Like, that's how they represented half the time.
Let's see. Do you believe that... Oh, I'm sorry?
There's one from Ikeda Hakubi. I don't know if you're like before that or after that yet, but that's a very good one.
The one, let's see if I'm trying to find the one from Ikeda, because there's...
It's the one that says, I'm not ready to become a secret just yet.
Which deities? Okay, I think there was one right... The one that I was looking was literally right after that, so I will grab this.
All right. So I'm not... Oh, sorry, you go ahead.
No, you were reading it, go on.
All right, it says, I'm not ready to become a seeker just yet, but which deities do you each think are most concerned with social justice and helping the poor? I'm actually going to take this one first because I mentioned her before a couple times, but I didn't really get into it. So Nemetawe, I mentioned before. Her name is actually, I'll have to check, hang on. I always forget. It is...
So while Celery is looking this up, for those of you who don't know the term, seeker is a term that we use in our Discord server to denote somebody who's not a part of a formal religion of any kind, or who is a part of one but is exploring a different one and is trying to, kind of feel out a new religion. So this is someone who may be a part of, they may be very experienced within one faith, like they might be Wiccan, but they're kind of exploring, say, Hellenism or heathenry or something else because they feel a call. Sometimes it's atheists that are doing this. Sometimes it's, people from other faiths. There's no connotation about what they know necessarily, apart from the fact that they are exploring this other faith. So that's what seeker means.
All right, so alternate definitions I've seen are she who embraces those in need, she who loves those who have been stolen from, things like that. Basically, lover of justice and sort of recovering what has been lost. That can even be in reference to rights, honestly. So I think she's very much got that association. I think when I'm older and moved out and doing all my own things, I think I'll have like a specific festival for her that, like, in her honor, I will be donating to the poor and like just sort of helping people, doing a lot of that sort of stuff. I think that would be something I definitely want to do because I feel like it falls under her domain because she is called Lady of Truth a lot.
Holy crap, we have 72 people hanging out with us.
Hello, everybody.
This is one of the biggest streams I've done, like right there next to the wine rant. So on my side, I see Apollon as being very concerned with the poor. Apollon's temple actually did quite a lot for poor people, and there's also many myths where he disguises himself as a human. One of them in particular where he ended up serving a king for an entire year because he pissed off Zeus. But there's also, like, Dike, goddess of justice, is also very concerned with such things, and Zeus Xenios is as well. But there's also this idea that any of the gods could show up at your door and you wouldn't know, which is part of what Xenia is based on. So to some degree, all of the gods have concerns about the poor and such. But I would say Dike, Apollon, and Zeus would probably be those that are most concerned. And my cat ran into my mic. There you go. There's the bump I was warning y'all about. Hi, Luna.
Yeah, there's another one I could mention, especially in the later period, the Hellenistic era. Isis was a huge one. In Rome, she was especially worshipped by runaway slaves and things like that. Very much social justice related. She was patroness of like mothers and women who were in very tough situations, and anyone who was in tough situation, honestly. Yeah, she's great.
Asmodeus, I don't know if you've been there since the beginning, but I did rant at the beginning of this vid quite a bit about Thanksgiving and why I hate it. I was not as angry as I expected to be, but I did rant about it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Let's see. Hermes is the god of the internet. Gonna worship now. Yes, Hermes is very much the god of the internet. Like, this appears to be, generally agreed upon by most Hellenics. He's very much technologically inclined.
Yeah, and in reference to Thoth, I actually see him as a god of gaming, honestly, because he actually, in one of his myths, he gambled for moonlight. So I see that as like a god of gamblers and gamers and just sort of that realm of things. Like, anyway.
So, Cassandra, this is actually a good question. It's one that I cover frequently on my channel. No, atheists are not strange or broken people for not experiencing deity. In fact, there are a number of what they call like mind blind pagans. That's the term that I've seen used online. I don't know if there's an official term, but people that have not had direct experiences with deities, they can't sense them, they can't feel them, and yet they believe in them. And atheists that have never had experiences with deities or have found rational reasons to disbelieve experiences that they might have had, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that worldview. That doesn't make you strange or broken. It just means like you can't control what you believe, right? Like it means that evidence has come to the light, or, you know, like philosophy has come to light that has caused you to no longer believe or to never have believed, and that's fine. That is absolutely fine. You are not going to find a single bit of judgment from anybody that I host on my channel ever for the fact that you're an atheist. Like, I will never say that you're a broken person because of that. You just have a different, like, worldview than I do.
No, for sure.
And atheism isn't even necessarily a worldview, but my faith, like, affects my worldview to some degree. The cycle of reciprocity and the signs and such that I get do affect the things that I do. So I have a different worldview in that regard because my religion plays a part of it.
Yeah, like, I'm friends with so many atheists, and if we ever made those claims, we would be dropped instantly. Like, that is not something that is okay.
No, and it would be a shitty thing to do, because like if I say that an atheist is a broken person, then what's going to, like, how is that different than saying that you're a broken person because your experiences are not with my deities? Like, you get into really dangerous territory the moment you start to judge people for their beliefs. I'm going to start to judge somebody who does harmful things or whose beliefs lead them to harmful behaviors. I'm going to go after a fucking anti-theist who's going to tell me that I'm delusional and use medical language that hurts people, but I'm not going to go after an atheist who is an atheist. Like, why would I do that? Y'all are actually closer to us in terms of like being a religious minority who's hated by the majority, who they also, their beliefs lead them to do harmful things. Like, I did an entire video on why proselytizing is a problem.
Yeah, not to mention we're both called Satanists.
Yeah, big, and a lot of that's because they think they think that you guys are us. Like, my entire show that I do on Monday nights, Xenia Bridge, originally, before it became the Coalition, was themed around why that idea is mistaken and a problem, and why atheists thinking the same thing about us is also an issue. We have far more in common, and, at the risk of, being a cheeky bitch, my tagline is "We're stronger together," and there's a reason I picked that.
That's a very good tagline. All right, and next question.
Do you believe new deities are still born today?
Maybe. I haven't had any experiences like that, though.
I don't know. You'll hear me say that a lot. Like, I'll say this is my opinion and I think this, but I honestly cannot speak authoritatively on that. If they are, then it's kind of a double-edged sword, because a lot of people who claim to have discovered new deities, and again, apologies if you can hear Luna purring in the background, but a lot of people who claim to have discovered new deities end up being cult leaders. It's kind of dangerous. So, like, it doesn't really matter to me whether new deities are born or not, because I've never experienced them.
Yeah, I'm very much with you there.
How does your religion regard the god couple Hades and Persephone? What are your thoughts about them? So my thoughts are that the kidnapping story of Persephone is both incredibly symbolic and also typical of the culture. But if you look at the way that they're portrayed, especially in later mythology, they're basically a power couple. Like, Persephone very much rules over Hades' realm, and Hades is known as the hospitaller, because he is the receiver of all. And she is the one who kind of helps take care of the dead once they're there. She's the one who receives the majority of the offerings around funerary rites and such. And it's her also that was honored in the Eleusinian Mysteries primarily. So I honestly see them as a power couple, and whether they're in love or not, their marriage is functional. So, like, I see them both also as being extremely understanding, because gods of the dead intimately understand mortality in a way that the Teoe, because of miasma, probably don't. So let's see. And it skipped all the way to the bottom. Let's see if I can find. Let's see. Oh, crap. It is way up there. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we've got a lot of questions because it took us a long time to answer one of them. What do you think of Jesus mythicism and when people claim Jesus was copied off of older pagan gods? I think it's full of shit, personally. I'm friends with several anti-mythicists, one of which just got like a book deal to write an anti-mythicist book. I've read all of the arguments. They're often based on like overgeneralization and misunderstanding. I don't care whether he was real or not, and I don't know why atheists do.
Yeah, that's one thing that's funny with us. We can accept that he resurrected and then say, so what?
Yeah, I did an entire video about that actually. Can we depend on divine inspiration? It's literally about, okay, great, let's completely like say that the Bible is fully divinely inspired. Where does that lead us on our search to truth? Not a damn place. Nowhere.
Exactly.
But yeah, like Jesus mythicism, I think that a lot of it's spurred on by anger. Personally, like a lot of us were fucking hurt by religion, like and by religion I mean capital R, like the big fucking three, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us were like, we go through angry pagan phases. A lot of us that go, instead of through an atheist like thing on the way to being pagan, like a lot of us go straight to paganism and we become fucking angry. Like there are like Deianics that I've met that just deny the existence of a male god at all because we got fucking hurt by Christianity. I don't think all atheists are like this, but a lot of them go through that phase, and I think that mythicism in part spawned from that. But I also don't think, again, that it matters. I don't think it matters whether he was a real person. I don't think it matters whether he did all those miracles or not. Like, I don't think that any of that adds up to Christianity being one to religion. And I feel like that's the conversation we need to be having rather than was this person historical when we have no way to know.
Yeah, and I don't think it matters whether he was historical because the stories are there and we can treat them the same way as we treat our myths.
So, how might a call from a deity feel like or be like for an atheist? Celery, do you want to take this one first? Because this is a whole big bag of worms because of just the variety of experiences that can call somebody to a religion.
Honestly, it depends on the person. Like, you may be an aphantasiac, so you may not experience, like, you may not be able to envision things in your mind that other people may be able to. So it may look a lot different for those people. And then there's also just sort of where you're coming from, what stage in your development you are, like your personal growth and your journey. Like for me, my first religious experience was just an image, like just in my mind. It was just a smiling woman, and like nothing had to be communicated. I just knew that's Isis, and that's actually what was the sort of the declencher. I don't know if that's a real English word, but it's a French word. So yeah, that was the moment that I stopped being agnostic and I started believing. So yeah, it may be like that. It may be something overwhelming like Eliakai experienced. It may be even just something small.
Well, and I actually had a friend recently who had a series of like invasions into their dreams. This was an atheist friend where it got more and more and more insistent, and the more he denied it, like the worse it got, to the point where one of them, his dream shifted like midway through to specifically prove that this is what was going on. And that's how like that call happened. I had another friend who'd been having visions from a young age of a particular being that later they discovered was actually potentially a Greek hero. My experience I talked about personally. Other people have had more quiet experiences. I have another friend who talks about being obsessed with a certain pantheon of gods growing up, and then gradually kind of coming to the conclusion that they wanted to try worshiping them, and then life changed afterwards. Calls can be subtle or they can be loud. It really depends on the person and also the deities. Like the stories for calls for Hellenic gods, for example, tend to be very different than the ones that I've heard from heathens, tend to be different than the ones I've heard from Chemetics.
Yeah.
I think there's different personalities between the pantheons that affect like who tends to be drawn also.
Yeah, like my experience, I was in high school. I was trying to meditate because that had been something I was doing for class. It had been like a social emotional learning class. So I was trying to develop myself, trying to be more spiritual and more attentive for myself. So I was at home meditating, and I had been researching paganism. I was like one of those anti-theist enablers. Like I saw what they said, they're just absolute anger, and I thought, oh, I don't want to be stupid. I don't want to be irrational. So I was off in my corner trying not to feel bad and not even being sure if I could be religious again, even though I wanted to. I really wanted to believe. I just didn't feel like I was allowed. And then that one experience, I was sitting meditating and I just saw her. I saw Isis and she just sort of smiled at me. And I got a feeling of permission. Like, forget those guys. You're allowed to be yourself.
Well, and I'd say that my call probably started a lot earlier. I talked before in my deconversion story over on Neil's channel about a book called The Egypt Game. I told you about this actually, that I originally wanted to worship the Kemetic deities, but I kind of got rejected, for lack of a better way to put it, or rather I just was never reached back to. But when I read the book The Egypt Game, like the plot of that, for people who never had to read it, was that these kids kind of find in the back of this antique store a whole bunch of Egyptian stuff and they start play acting. And at one point they do this thing where they make offerings on an altar they made in front of a statue of an Egyptian god, and then they get the thing they asked for. And like when I read that scene, I was maybe 12 or 13. I felt this like massive longing kind of rise up in me that I wish that there were still temples that you could do that kind of stuff with. But there weren't, and there was only one God, so I had to be a Christian. I deconverted shortly after that, but like that was probably my first call. And, you know, as time went on, the Greek gods just got more and more and more insistent. Like looking back, there were a lot of signs that I should have gone to Hellenism and I was just a stubborn prat.
Yeah, that's a very interesting experience. I've never heard of that book, honestly.
It's a really good book. It's middle grade, so like it's very simple reading style, but I really enjoy it. It's actually still on my shelf right now.
Yeah, my first exposure to that kind of thing was Percy Jackson and also the Kane Chronicles. You can see where that went.
Yeah. Do you think the Romans turning away from the Greek gods helped influence the fall of the Roman Empire? I think that it did actually cause unrest within the Roman Empire, because like forcibly genociding away a religion has consequences.
Yeah.
But I think that most of what caused the fall of the Roman Empire was the empire-ness of it, like the empire building. Empires are not very stable.
Definitely not. I mean, look at Britain.
Let's see. How do I experience Medusa? I don't. For the most part, she is not one that I interact with very much. However, the mythology surrounding that, I understand from cultural context rather than like just, hey, she got taken advantage of and then punished. There's an entire bit of cultural context surrounding that makes more sense if you understand the laws of the time. So her story is very much a cautionary tale. It just, because of our, for lack of a better way to put it, etic view, because of our outsider view, it's a lot harder for modern people to read, especially if you've got triggers around assault. Let's see. I'm trying to find another question.
Ping. Can deities die?
Can deities die? Well, according to mythology, they can.
Yep, according to ours. We have a dying and rising god, Osiris.
Technically Greek deities can't die, but they can kind of be effectively dead. Like the Titans are locked up in Tartaros.
Yeah, and I know, I forget his name, but he's a light deity in heathenry.
Yeah, so according to some mythology they can, according to others they can't. I'm not really sure. Again, this is one of those, I can't deign to know the will or nature of the gods. I don't think that if they can, that it would be like what we think of as dying, because deities are effectively disembodied minds. So I'm not really sure how a disembodied mind would die, in the sense of like the body like gives up its last heartbeat or something, the way that we think of death. I think it would be a very different thing if they did.
Yeah, I think for us, the idea is more so that, I mean, like in the mythology, it says that they were people and then they died and then became deities, sort of thing. So it would be in the same sense of even we could be, if like we had enough time and enough power. But yeah,
Freya, this is very much my experience as well. Calls from war deities tend to be rather powerful. I'm here, now deal with it. That was my experience with Athena. Like, she showed up, and there was absolutely no question that she was there. Anybody who's ever been called by the Morrigan, which is a lot of us, That also is like it suddenly she's there and you can't deny that she exists.
Yeah. The only warlike deity I actually have is Set, and he wasn't really like, boom, I'm here. He was more like, hi, I'm here, sort of like needling you, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
like your jokey older brother who like you kind of hate but kind of love. So yeah, but he's very warlike as well.
All right, so I'm going to take one or two more questions and then we're going to wrap up because we're at 2 hours. And usually for rewatch time, that's going pretty long. I'd say we did a pretty decent job, about an hour on the history and about an hour on Q&A, most of which was religious because you guys are awesome.
Yeah.
Again, there's 65 people watching. I've got 55 likes. The 10 of you who haven't gotten around to that, please go ahead and pop down there and feed the algorithm. It's really appreciated and it really, really helps. What about Adonis? Isn't the big thing about him that he had a tragic death? I believe he was a hero rather than a god, but I might be wrong. Again, not one that I engage in praxis with, so it's not one that I've researched, and I will fully admit if I'm wrong, so give me a second to look that up. Oh, that looks like a question that's actually for somebody in the chat. Zeus's dad is Kronos. So do you guys have any more questions for Celery really quick? While I go ahead and look up Adonis?
Ooh, thoughts on reincarnation. I actually have a very interesting view on this because I talk a lot with my Buddhist friend. So it was Faber's question in the chat here.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, it didn't exist as a concept in Egypt, but I think it's very, very likely that it could happen. Because the way we see it is we have a multi-part soul. Not just like 3 parts, but like 5 or 6, I think. So yeah, one of those parts is actually the physical body. But I think that, so basically when you die, your Ka and your Ba, which are 2 parts of you, one's a personality, one's a life force, they come together and you're going through the afterlife with them. And when you get to the judgment, they weigh your heart, which is another part. And if you're not pure enough, if you have committed too many wrongful actions, then you will be annihilated. But I think it could be an annihilation in the Buddha sense of like their hell is a purification so that you can be reincarnated. So it could be seen as when your heart is destroyed, your Ka actually goes back and actually becomes reincarnated. That could be something, but it's not your entire soul, it's just one piece.
So I did look up Adonis, and Adonis is actually a syncretized deity. He comes from Adon, which is a Canaanite deity, and the story of Adonis and Aphrodite is actually syncretized. It comes from the story of Adon and Astarte. So that's actually an example of a deity that came from another pantheon and was named and
Really
got syncretized.
Nice.
So are there deities connected with future visions? Yes, quite a few. Apollon is the most obvious from Greek mythology, but also other deities were connected to future vision as well. In fact, there were oracles of the dead, Nekiomantheon, that would connect Hyades and Persephone with future visions. There were also other omens and such from other gods that could help you open up those future visions, and Athena was said to help you interpret them. So yeah, there's entire like books written by scholars on omens and oracles and such in ancient Greece. What about in Comedicism?
We don't really have that as much, I think. I don't think I'm well read enough on that, but I know that there are deities that are said to, like I know Jehuti and Sesht, Thoth and Seshat, they're said to mark out how long a king's reign is, how long a life is, things like that. That could be a sense of knowing what will happen. Mm-hmm. Could also be a sense of like making it happen, but I think it's more a sense of predicting it. So they could have associations with predicting the future and oracles, but I don't really know about any sort of actual oracles.
Hey John, welcome. We're actually about to wrap up, unfortunately. As far as reincarnation goes, there were actually ideas of reincarnation. They mostly go back to Platon, but the Orphics had them as well, some of them. Within Greek mythology, there's also stories within Greek mythology as well of reincarnation and such. The Orphic myth of Zagreus being like one of the most prominent, but also Adonis was said to have done it. But for the most part, the vast majority of like Greek history, there was less an idea of reincarnation and more everybody goes to Hades. And maybe depending on the era, some people go to the Elysian Fields and some people go to the Fields of Asphodel, or everybody goes to the Fields of Asphodel, or like except for like Children of the Gods, which stopped happening after the Age of Heroes. So like reincarnation until Platon was not really a big thing within Greek mythology for the most part.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned in my video on Homer's view on the afterlife, there were several views of the afterlife throughout Greek history, especially in the classical era when people started arguing with each other about it. So, answering, do the Greeks believe XYZ? Well, which city-state and what era are we talking about and who wrote about it? That's one of those things with recon.
For sure.
Aphrodite is not necessarily of Middle Eastern origin. There are actually records of her within Phoenician mythology. She was just heavily syncretized with Middle Eastern stuff. I've read a bunch of scholars on both sides of that.
Yeah.
What would Celery? We've got one for you. What would be the first recommendation of a first book for somebody interested in Kemeticism?
Well, personally, I'm very biased about my tradition, but I would recommend Following the Sun by Sharon Laborde, because that book actually goes over a lot of...
You fangirl so hard over her. It's adorable whenever you talk about her.
I know. But yeah, I recommend that book so strongly because it does go over the different ideas, the different like sects, I would say. Like she goes over Wicca and goddess spirituality and different paths of recon and Kemetic orthodoxy and things like that. And she just sort of goes over like, we're not about woo here.
We need a book like that in Hellenism.
For sure. Yeah, I recommend her book very strongly because of that. And it does go over some basic things we do in ritual and things like that.
Ikeda, thank you so much. Snakes and Fire. Apparently this shall be a thing. Snakes and Fire. Thank you for allowing me into your club. Thank you so much for your generosity, Ikeda. You have spoiled the heck out of me tonight. Midnight, no, unless you believe Plato. Tartaros was actually not considered to be a place of punishment until Plato decided that. Before that, it was just where the Titans were. So I don't tend to go with the Platonic afterlife. Personally, I tend to lean more toward the Homeric afterlife. So, yeah. I'm actually, Midnight, I will be doing a video about this. It kind of, there's one that I would recommend for beginners praxis, but there's not one that I would recommend for beginners theology or beginners like belief structure, because most of the ones that are out there have some pretty bad flaws. For example, one of the ones that people often bring up, which is Charis and Komos, which were done by Sarah K. Winter. Like, some people recommend those, but they have stuff about god spousing in them, which for most of Greek history was very much considered to be miasmic, because, like, you know, sperm is miasmic, so, like, why would you be able to screw the gods, especially because the whole Age of Heroes thing? And like another one that was published by Llewellyn was called Hellenismos, and it was written by a ceremonial magician and focused heavily on like magical tradition rather than the offering side of things. But the one that I would recommend for praxis, because it is very, very good and it is a very pick up and play type book, is Hellenic Polytheism Household Worship by Labris, which is a... Now, the Lapras community in Greece, which is the people that wrote this, are problematic in other ways, but the book itself is a fantastic resource. It has, like, pick-up-and-play type rituals, and you can, you know, especially if you go back through and you watch my videos from the Common Hellenism series on things like constructing your own prayer, they give a, like, monthly ritual calendar outline. They don't have a yearly one with, like, holidays and stuff, but they do have a monthly one with, you know, sourcing and footnotes on where they got all those ideas from. They've got quick reference lists for many of the like commonly worshipped Hellenic gods, including things like what offerings and such they prefer. They talk a bit about the sort of attitude to bring to worship. They talk about making carneps for like purification. It's a very thin but very like to the point primer on Hellenism, and it also has rituals that you can just pick up and do from the outset with pretty good explanations as to what you're supposed to be doing with those rituals. So that is the only 101 book that I have read that I really, really like.
That's awesome.
Why do Nazis seem to love the Norse pantheon? Because actual Nazis tried to use the Norse pantheon as propaganda.
Yep.
Ocean, in his video on folkism, which I highly recommend watching his and mine, but his first then mine, because he does a really good job of laying down the history, whereas I debunk some of the modern arguments. Ocean actually talks about folkism and where a lot of folkist ideas originated within Nazi ideology. So I highly recommend going and checking out Ocean Keltoy's video on folkism first, then check mine out, because I talk about some of the modern arguments that Nazis like to use to try to, like, you know, excuse themselves using us, Native Americans. But he talks a lot about the history regarding that. But it's because of the Volkish movement within, like, actual Nazi times.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way we covered folkism differently. Like, he went over what it is, you went over why it's a problem, I went over a personal experience regarding it.
Pensive, if you're having a hard time with miasma, I have a whole video on that. Go check out my Common Hellenism series. If you go to my main channel page, there's a playlist called Common Hellenism. If you click on that and you scroll down, there's one that says, what is miasma, what is agos? I explain thoroughly what it is there. All right, so I think that kind of wraps us up. I don't see too much more. My only, I think Old Stones, New Temples is a decent book. Problem is you can't get it anymore. So, like, Old Stones, New Temples is not terrible, but you can't get it anymore. And there are also some kind of iffy beliefs that come out of the organization that wrote it. I used to be a member of Hellenian. I have some issues with them now. Like, the community itself is great, but the leadership structure has some problems. But the problem is that they kind of lost the copyright to the book, so it's never going to get republished, basically.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, because it was probably, of the bunch, other than the Labrys book, it was probably the best book out of the bunch. We have a lot of problems with a lot of folkists writing Hellenic content, and, like, also freaking, like, ceremonial magicians, because they draw a lot of their stuff out of the, like, Greek magical papyri.
Yeah.
Which is annoying to both of us.
Thelema.
Yeah, Thelema.
Yeah, oh yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Well, I mean, they don't pronounce it right either, to be fair.
Fair enough.
Because it comes from a Greek word. So I hope that was helpful. Again, the book that I recommended was called Hellenic Polytheism, Household Worship by Labrys. I will type it out in the chat really quick. Sorry for the tap. I've been trying to avoid that all round, but... There we go. Sorry for the tap for those of you who don't like that sound. But that's the book that I was recommending. And I highly recommend anybody can pick it up. It's a little expensive for how many pages it is, but it is worth it. Like, my copy of it is sitting on my altar, and it is so heavily thumbed through. Like, I come back to it again and again. The other thing I recommend is, if you're looking into Deities, there is a series of devotionals that are like collections of stories and poetry and articles and things about the various gods. And those can be hit or miss, but they're like great for reading and such on the sacred days of the gods to kind of get closer to them. And I really enjoy them for that reason. So, all right, we're doing a wrap up. Celery, I'm going to get your link into the description, but you do have mod power, so you can post it in the live chat for those that are not subbed to you already, if you'd like, as well.
Sure. All right. There you go, everybody.
So please go check Celery out. Celery has the same level of devotion to historical accuracy that I do, but just much better language skills. And like her content is excellent. She does a lot of definitional stuff. She's a little more concise than I am in some places too. Like I know I'm being self-deprecating, but like you do have like your videos, most of them are below 10 minutes and you managed to get out a lot of content in that time.
Yeah, I try to do one every second week. I work full time currently, so it's difficult, but I'm trying.
And so for those of you who are here for the first time, please hit subscribe and the notification if you're interested in checking out more stuff from me. I do have a pretty big back catalog. If you guys enjoy my live streams, kind of like the more solo ones outside of the bridge, there's actually at least 2 more of those. There's a Q&A stream where I was hanging out with Ocean, and there was another stream with Callan, which is the Platonism wine rant. On Saturday, we're actually going to be doing a Stoicism wine rant, Callan and I, because people requested that during the Platonism one. And at some point in the future, after I make my video on Platonism and Christianity, we're going to be doing a Platonism wine rant too, where we talk about its influences on Christianity in a little more detail that I can get into. So with that said, this is going to close out the stream. Thank you guys so much for hanging with me, even though it was Thanksgiving. We had way bigger turnout than I expected.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming out. Had a lot of fun today.
And remember, everyone, we're stronger together.